41% of the planet's surface is already desert, and another 40% is on the verge of being swallowed. And at a time when Earth is losing its last green spaces, China has become the center of one of the boldest ecological resurrections of the century. While the rest of the world struggles to find answers, one man has forged a completely different path on his own. In just 30 years, he has planted more than 200 million willow trees, released 1.2 million rabbits into the sea of sand, and built 196,000 solar panels as a national symbol. So who exactly is the person behind this miracle? And how could a rabbit possibly save an entire barren desert? Today, let's join Terran Works to uncover the secrets behind the most extraordinary green resurrection ever recorded. And it all began in one of the harshest regions of China, the Kabuki Desert, where winters are freezing with knife-sharp winds dropping temperatures to minus 20 degrees Celsius, and summers are scorching, burning the ground beneath. In the past, this area was nothing like the barren desert it is today. Instead, it was once a prosperous agricultural land with villages, rivers, and vast grasslands capable of sustaining entire communities. Then everything changed. Winds grew stronger, grass disappeared. Desertification happened. Sand began to move, swallowing houses and roads. The remaining residents left one by one. According to 2025 reports, about 27.4% of China's land area has experienced desertification, equivalent to nearly 4 times the size of the US state of Texas. The consequences include not only the collapse of biodiversity, but also increasingly frequent sandstorms that severely erode the topsoil and make recultivation almost impossible. If you cannot yet envision the scale of destruction, that is roughly 20 million tons of agricultural produce lost every year to the sea of sand. In this context, in just a few decades, the Kabuki Desert expanded more than 25 miles eastward, burying thousands of acres of farmland under dunes reaching up to 200 feet high, turning it into China's 7th largest desert with an area of more than 7,200 square miles. So how did a nation once swallowed by the desert to the brink of despair not only halt this catastrophe, but rise to become the greatest strategic rival to the United States? As early as the 1950s and 1960s, China launched one of the largest anti-desertification campaigns in history. Windbreak forests were planted, livestock grazing was restricted, and numerous deep wells were drilled through layers of dusty soil. Yet despite massive effort and resources, the results were almost zero. The desert kept advancing, threatening the livelihoods of more than 400 million residents living in the semi-arid regions of northern and northwestern China. But China wouldn't be China if it couldn't find an intelligent solution to any problem. And that turning point began with one man, Wang later known as the Desert King. What's remarkable is that he was not born into wealth or privilege. On the contrary, Wang was once a poor teacher in Inner Mongolia, cycling more than 6 miles across sand every day to reach his classroom. There were days when the wind was so strong that his bicycle was buried halfway in sand, and sand whipped into his face and straight into his lungs. It was in those harsh conditions that he made a bold vow: "If I cannot escape the desert, I will make it pay rent." And the incredible thing is, he actually did. In 1988, when he owned only a small salt company and had almost nothing in hand, Wang Wenbiao decided to attempt what no one else dared to do. He poured all his savings, even borrowed more, to pursue an ambition that seemed impossible, turning sand into living soil. People called him crazy. The authorities saw him as a dreamer. Yet Wang chose to live right in the desert, measuring every drop of moisture and patiently observing the tiniest changes in the soil. He began by spending hundreds of millions of dollars to build windbreak walls, plant more than 60 million willow trees, and green 1,500 square miles of barren land. But the true breakthrough came when he devised a strategy no one had ever tried before, bringing rabbits into the desert. Today, more than 1.2 million Rex rabbits live in areas once swallowed by sand. This French hybrid breed is considered the white gold of the fur industry. Fur soft as velvet, sleek as otter skin, with no coarse hairs, and each pelt can sell for up to $30. A female rabbit can produce 25 litters a year, yielding 200 to 300 offspring, endure cold down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit, and consume very little water. Perfect for the harsh environment of kabuki. Wang soon realized that to raise rabbits in the desert, he first had to create shade and a food source, and willow trees were the key. With roots extending more than 300 feet deep, the willows could draw groundwater, hold the sand in place, and create a cooler microclimate. Once the willows stood firm, the rabbits could survive, and once the rabbits survived, the soil began to recover. But planting trees in a barren desert of scorching sand and raging dust storms was a task that demanded extraordinary faith and patience. First, workers had to identify locations with the highest potential to retain moisture, then dig deep pits so willow roots could reach the damp soil beneath the burning sand. After that, they built temporary fences of wire mesh and reed around the pits to reduce wind strength and keep sand from filling them back in within hours. Young willow saplings were treated with a moisture-retaining solution, then planted straight into the ground and secured with stakes to prevent strong winds from uprooting them. In the first weeks, each willow was shielded with a sunshade and drip irrigated with just enough water to encourage the roots to drill deeper underground. Only once the willows had stabilized the microclimate could Wang introduce the second critical component of the ecosystem, the Rex rabbits. Rex rabbits were never released into the wild but raised in enclosed ecological farms. Their meat became food, their fur became clothing, their organs became medicine, but most important of all was their manure. Rabbit manure contains nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the very nutrients desert sand completely lacks. When dropped onto the ground, the manure transforms sand into moist, nutrient-rich humus. Remarkably, Rex rabbits cannot digest grass seeds, meaning they unintentionally sow seeds along with natural fertilizer packets. From there, an ecological loop emerged. Willows feed rabbits, rabbits feed the soil feeds the willows. As a result, each acre of land produced more than 5 tons of humus per year, and within just 3 to 5 years, golden sand turned into fertile soil. Thanks to this model, more than 200 million willow trees have been planted, creating a massive green wall that reduces wind speed by up to 90% and blocks 15 million tons of sand each year. As the ecosystem began to recover, Kabuki rapidly transformed into a massive ecological economic laboratory. The first phase was a battle against the sand. Dozens of bulldozers and several hundred workers operated almost around the clock to level the terrain, stabilize the dunes, and construct windbreak barriers. Within just a few years, about 700 to 800 square miles of desert had been greened, laying the foundation for the next stage, the Rex rabbit farming model. Around 1.2 million rabbits not only helped revive the soil, but also generated more than 100 million yuan in economic value each year, providing stable livelihoods for thousands of households in areas once swallowed by sand. Once the local economy was secure, Wang expanded his ambitions by building the Junma solar power plant, using 196,000 panels arranged in the shape of a giant galloping horse, the world's largest energy artwork, certified by Guinness. The plant generates about 1.5 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity per year, enough to supply more than 200,000 people, while the panels themselves play an ecological role, creating shade, reducing wind speed by up to 50%, helping grass regrow, and turning rabbits, sheep, and geese into biological lawnmowers that keep the soil stable. For more than a decade, Kabuki proved that ecological economics can become a true engine of development. From 2010 to 2020, the model generated $10 billion USD, making it the most profitable green model in Asia. On that foundation, the Junma solar plant continued expanding its impact. By 2022, the project had saved 760,000 tons of coal and reduced 1.85 million tons of CO2, while in just 4 years transforming 2,600 acres of the Dead Sea into a thriving energy oasis. Then the unimaginable happened. After decades of human struggle against sand, nature finally responded. A 2023 report from China's Ministry of Ecology stunned the world. Populations of wild deer, desert foxes, and migratory birds in Kabuki had increased fourfold compared to 1990. Species once vanished reappeared. Groundwater, Kabuki's liquid gold, rose by an average of 5 to 6.5 feet over 20 years. It means that if you drill a well today, you only need to drill half the depth your grandparents did. And that difference marks the boundary between dead land and living land. Not only animals, but more than 100 native plant species, such as feathergrass, desert poplar, and various desert flowers, returned, creating an almost unbelievable sight. Golden sand, interwoven with green grass, even patches of small shimmering forests under the sunlight. However, the journey has not been without controversy. Some experts argue that the role of rabbits has been exaggerated and that most of the success stems from state planning and massive investment. In addition, several pilot zones have reported nitrogen pollution or the appearance of green algae, raising questions about the long-term sustainability of the entire model. Now let's fly 4,000 miles south to Australia, where rabbits once caused one of the most devastating ecological disasters in history. In the 19th century, only 24 rabbits were brought in for recreational hunting. Yet within just 50 years, their population exploded to more than 1 billion, stripping grasslands bare, destroying tree roots, and turning nearly 2/3 of Australia's plains into desert-like wastelands. The Australian government tried everything, building a 2,000-mile fence, releasing viruses, using explosives, carrying out mass culling, but still failed to control them. So what made rabbits monsters in Australia but saviors in China? The answer lies in human action. In Kabuki, Rex rabbits were never released into the wild. They were part of a closed ecological chain, tightly managed, eating willows, producing manure, restoring soil, and generating economic value. China wasn't simply raising rabbits. It was building a strategic ecosystem in which rabbits were just one precisely calculated link in the entire soil recovery cycle. Although controversies remain, the results were still convincing enough for the United Nations to recognize Kabuki as a global model for land restoration in 2011 and as an international demonstration center in 2019. From there, Wang's story quickly extended beyond China's borders. This ecological economic model spread to Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe, where many nations are struggling with desertification and climate change. Most notable is Andalusia, Spain, the largest semi-arid region in Europe. Here, the government has begun adopting a Kabuki-style approach, building a Mediterranean green wall restoring native plants, implementing regenerative agriculture, and constructing agro-PV solar farms. From a dead land, Kabuki has become a symbol of hope. If a desert in China can be revived, the question is, what is stopping the rest of the world? And don't forget to like and subscribe to discover more stories that seem impossible to believe.